All right, welcome everyone. I speak loud to begin with, so good luck with the volume back there. Well, greetings from State 48, Arizona, also known as hell about this time of year. My name's Dan Demlin. I'm from Arizona State University, and today we'll be talking about school security in a way you probably never consider. I am a senior architect with Team Labs in the Office of the University Architect. My job is as senior architect. I have 2 other architects with me on the team and about 8 project managers, and we're responsible for building all lab projects for the university in its entirety, all campuses. I'm in a highly technical role and very key in that role. This particular presentation dates way back to my beginnings when I was with the school facilities board for the state of Arizona as their staff architect. I also teach at the Herberger Institute of Design. My area of specialty is facilities management, which I just published my first book, and I also teach building codes. Those are the areas that I focus the most. Hopefully that will expand as I get to the last part of my career here. As you can see, I'm the author of The Complete Facilities Manager. I have a card up here for the book as well as my card if you would like to leave. When you get ready to leave, if you would like to contact me. It is a very neat book. Currently, APPA is thinking of even carrying it in their bookstore very soon. So hopefully you can get there. If not, the card up here, you can go directly to the publisher to get it. All right? Let's talk a little bit about the intro here. This is an AIA course. We have cards up here. If you want AIA credit, please fill them out afterwards. Take them downstairs, and they'll make sure to get your CEUs for this. This is a certified AIA course, and of course, you can request your certificates. This is the standard AIA disclaimer. I'm not going to get into it. It's the standard stuff we all see. I do want to focus a little bit on the description. Between 2000 and 2021, we experienced 433 casualties with 183 deaths in school shootings. We're going to look today very, very much focused on a study that I did right after Sandy Hook when I was with School Facilities Board. And we're going to come up with some brand new ideas, I hope, that everyone needs to look at. This is not about turning schools into prisons or arming teachers and staff. Let me explain to you, both those are the absolute worst things to do. It does not matter what we do. We have to keep the learning environment or we're not meeting our mission. As a facilities guy for education, my mission is to make my facilities the best learning environment for the students at all costs. Learning objectives. We're going to talk about, when you get out of here, I want you to grasp very heavily, arming staff and teachers is an absolute forbidden no-no. And I'm going to talk about it heavily during this part. We're going to learn how to accomplish a non-prison environment and yet meet school security in ways we've never thought of. And as an architect, my big thing is I'm going to push you to think about being creative. Think something new. New ideas are what we're going to come out to be. We need to understand we're fighting the bad guys, and they'll be 2 steps ahead of us, and there's nothing that's ever going to change it. They're without bounds, they're without limitations, but on the facility side, I have both. I have to convince decision makers, is this a valid threat? And how do we do that? That's far beyond what I can get into this presentation, but I want us to think about for a moment, because that's what this is all about. What events do you remember in your life? Some of us are old enough to remember JFK, Challenger's one, 9/11, that's the biggest one. I'm going to tell you right now, there's this fateful day in December 2012 that changed my life forever. My wife, she had the kids out the day of the shooting. I try not to do this. My son could have been in that class. Give me a minute. Every time I do this, I try not to get choked up. See, this, I take the kids out to the mall. Didn't pick up her phone all day. The story about that day in my life is in an article I wrote. You'll see it later on. But it turned me on to understand the importance of protecting our children. We talk about security, it's not just the active shooter. That's the first thing we think about. We're facilities people. It goes beyond that. Way beyond that. We need to think more than one thing. However, today's world, that's the main thing we think about. We need to do threat assessments. Now, when I talk about threat assessments, I don't mean just about this potential perpetrator who comes in onto our campus with a gun. How many of your schools have cleaners of any type? You know, that's a security breach waiting to happen. It's called a hazmat. One spill, wrong place, wrong chemical, and all hell breaks loose. I design labs, as I told you. Some gases I deal with that's on these campuses make some of these other gases we think are deadly chemicals. They make it look like candy. I work with HPMs, hazardous production materials. I code. These are the most deadliest gases known to man. We can't have a mistake like that. We need to look at activities profiles, not just for these perpetrators who come in with a gun, but what about our cleaning staff? What about our maintenance staff? How do they handle these materials? Are they being the best with it? Security is best thought of as a layered approach, an onion. What do you do with an onion? Step by step by step. SEPTED, one of the biggest things. My university is in the town that has the ability to say it was the very first, one of the very first jurisdictions in the country with a SEPTED ordinance 35 years ago. We can address these through design. We can address these through facilities. One of the biggest things I fought with all my schools, an 8-foot chain link security perimeter fence costs the same amount as a 6-foot wrought iron one. But everyone wants that 6-foot iron one because it looks so nice. Where is our priority? By the end of today, hopefully you'll start to think things differently. So other things to consider when we start talking now. In higher ed, it's a little harder, but rather than thinking of campus-wide, let's talk about building specific and apply these to it. Need a single point of entry. When we have multiple points of entry that we can't secure, we end up in a situation where we cannot control what happens. Some of the school districts, when I was at the school facilities board in the rural area of Arizona, you'd walk in and there's a sign-in book. No one there. Paul Tim, one of the top security specialists in schools, he said, I've never signed my name yet. He signed in Michael Jordan and Beyonce. And no one checks it. First of all, they shouldn't be signing in. They should give you an ID. Even the car keys, why? They give you the ID, we give you the little sticker put on, go see whoever you want. Oh, by the way, keep your driver's license. If anything happens, I know where to find you. How much does that cost on operations? But it increases security. A secured sally port. I've done prison design. I'm a 46-year veteran architect. I have done every occupancy in the building code. I've taught it. And I'm going to tell you right now, some of these things can cross over. Now, we don't need this institutionalized sally port where it's so rigid like you do in a prison or a jail. But if we use that thought, a dual entry to get in, and as we start to look at these case studies, you're going to start to see there are times where it may work. And that's a small design thing that we build in at the time we start to build the schools. A panic button. You've talked about this and seen it in banks. That little silent button. There's a problem, front office pushes it, it immediately brings people note. EMS, everyone. Sometimes you might want to even lock that, attach that to an active system where it actually starts to lock down beyond that sally port, that second door, to where an intruder can't get in. These are all things that we have to think about. Think about break-resistant or bullet-resistant glass. Now, where I come from, we don't have this thing called weather. We have hot and hotter. I mean, you know, you look at our water at your faucets, and we have H&C, hot and caliente. I'm sorry, even in summer, I can't get water cool. But in climates here, and in the Southeast in particular, you have these things, it starts with an H, hurricanes. I don't know what those are, I'm thankful for it. But they can chuck a 2x4 through a window like it was a toothpick. And there's defenses you can do that are very, very inexpensive. Hurricane foam. For those of you who are along the East Coast, you probably know what I'm talking about. We'll talk about it here in a few minutes. Army teachers and staff, no way, no shape, no form. I've had the opportunity to train with the chief trainer of DPS SWAT. Every cadet in our state who's with DPS, and one of the things that I came to find out through that training is a simple rule. When these people come, their job is to neutralize the threat. And how do they acknowledge a threat? Who's holding the gun? They're not going to ask who the hell you are. There's a whole new thought to this that we need to think about. We need to think about making the learning environment something other than a prison. And after a major shooting, we saw it with Sandy Hook, we saw it with Parkland, we saw it with Texas, prisons, more security, more metal detectors. Is that the solution? We're going to talk about it a little more. There are many components that work together to make schools secure. And we need to understand it as facilities people. One of the neatest things about what I've done, I've sat in some of the top counterterrorism and homeland security conferences, and I was the only non-law enforcement person there. And they'd look at me and say, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I said, "I don't know, but if you shut up, maybe we can learn something from each other." And all of a sudden, I start coming up with ideas, and they're thinking, "We never thought of that." That's because you're bringing it from your world. I want to bring it into mine, because I know I can impact the lives of people better with my facility design. By the way, did I tell you I'm an architect? It gives you an idea of where my mindset is. It's very different. Today we're going to look at 3 basic studies. Sandy Hook, Columbine, Virginia Tech. Now, I want you to know this isn't me, because I'm not that bright to come up with it, but there are people who've already described school shootings, mass shootings, by definition. The first type is what we call the small one. These are the shootings that are 5 or less casualties. Okay? Usually these are ones that are very, very spur of the moment. Lover's triangle, got the bad grade, something of that nature. All right, now the big ones, which I'm going to jump to real quick, are the ones that are 10 and larger. And these are the ones that we hear about all the time. Those are the ones that are on the news. We just talked about 3 of them. All right? Since I did my research, we can have Parkland, we can have Texas involved with it as well. So we know that they've happened. You hear about those. The shooters on those are what we call injustice collectors. I've been wronged by society, my group, my type, my people have been wronged, and I'm going to get even. And sometimes they plan for months. Do you know that the Columbine shooters had books written on their psychology, and those very books were found in the homes of the shooter at Virginia Tech and Sandy Hook? They're learning. We need to learn. We need to learn different. Yes, this is a very uncomfortable topic, and in a few minutes you're going to find out how uncomfortable it gets. And I'm sorry, but we need to address it. We have to understand it. Out of Houston, Texas, Run, Fight, Hide. I think it's a great video. It's not for everything, but that's one that could look at it. Take a look on YouTube. You will absolutely start to think things different, what to do. I want to talk about Sandy Hook. We talk about that sally port. A sally port is a dual door. You come in one door, then you get let into a second door into it. When we look here at the shooting, look at the school. They had the double entry. Look at this. Why didn't it work? Well, because the shooter decided to shoot right next to it. Now, we can counteract that. UL 752, which is a standard. Yes, I'm an architect and I know specs, and I'll quote some of those from time to time, hopefully not to bore you. It states how we design and make bulletproof glass. Now, I want to say it's not bulletproof, it's bullet resistant. I've checked with so many ballistic specialists. The one thing they've all told me is the same thing. On the third round, there's possibility of breach. Did you hear me? Third round. When you come to find out through this, the key to saving lives is time is of the essence. You delay entry, you delay progression, you save lives. A hurricane, these level 2, level 3s, level 4 ballistic glass that we would typically put in cost between $75 and $100 a square foot to put in for a piece of glass, frame and all. But for about $10 a square foot installed, I can put a hurricane type film in behind it. That hurricane film will actually delay the entrance of a shooter in a forced breach like this up to 1.5 minutes. Now, what's going to be so unique is you're going to find out that all these shootings that we're studying here today, with the exception of Columbine because it was so different the first one, 8 to 9 minutes and it's done. A delay of 1.5 minutes has how much of an impact on lives lost that day. I don't know about you, my answer is pretty damn significant. Thank you very much. So that's what I'm trying to do, is get a new thought. The typical classroom door at Sandy Hook looked like this. We have them all. Little vision panel that gives an absolute recon to any bad guy, any perpetrator. They know what to do. Why they look in the window, they can see anything. So oftentimes, I've had some schools, they paint lines on the floor. Where's your vision? What can you see? And by the way, when an event comes, you get outside that line and you hunker down, you turn the lights off. We're starting to see where the facilities have impact. We don't think about it, but we do need to know it. And our job as facilities people, because last time I checked, I'm going to make the assumption every one of us in this room is a facilities person, right? Are you a facilities person? Raise your hand. Yeah, we are. Let's start thinking different about our jobs. And it starts with design, it starts with maintenance, it starts with operation. Now I want to look at this, because this is Sandy Hook, and keep in mind, this school was torn down 10 months, 9 months after the shooting. So I don't have a record to go through and get it. And there's a whole story about the state attorney's report, and I spoke to the state attorney and gave me some great information. I'm not going to be able to get into this whole presentation, but I want us to think about what we were looking at. See, the forced breach occurred here. That's the main entry. Shot next to the door, he goes in. If you look at the other doors, these were securable. On the date of that shooting, we would have looked at that school and said, it's perfectly secured. Tell that to 26 family victims, it was secured, because they don't believe it. So we have to think different. How do we think different? I want to take a few moments here. We're going to look at just this little zone. And this little zone comes back to something that we're going to look at and tie together a little later here about movement of these perpetrators. Okay? First of all, 8 shots to enter. That's at that window we just saw. Shooter goes in. The principal and school psychologist came out of a meeting with parents in this room, and they were both shot dead, first 2 victims right there. He then enters the office. Thankfully, whoever was in the office was concealed, was already on the phone to 911. Seeing, hearing nothing, he then exited. Now I'm going to tell you right now, when you talk to the state attorney of Connecticut, he's going to say, we don't know what the movements are. I have every search warrant that I've read executed. I have 6 911 recordings, and I placed this together along with their timelines, and I've discovered, well, number one, I discovered about a 9-second gap in the state attorney's report. No big deal. But I've also discovered that you can find exactly what happened, because the timeline tells us. In this first classroom, 15 children were killed and 2 teachers. Everyone dead in that room, no survivors. The room next door, 5 children, 2 adults killed, and by the way, one adult might be, you might recognize the name, Victoria Principal, the hero of that shooting. She saved many of her children by putting them in that restroom, 4 or 5 of them. We had 2 survive in the room and 9 escaped. Now the way that the 9 escaped is they were all found out over here. And the last shot, shooter's body right there. So to me, the timeline's very, very clear how the events happened. And when you listen to the 911 tape, I've heard them both, heard them all. 2 of them, you hear shooting, and on one of them is very clearly, you hear a gap, shot, and silence. And that was what the record shows. Shooter took his life. There's little doubt in my mind what the events went on. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to try to hedge my bets. I'm a research analyst. I'm an architect. Pretty good at what I do, apparently. Yes, you think so. So I'm going to tell you right now, I think that's the events. 28 dead. If it didn't shake you to the core that day, it should shake you to the core today. Okay? There were no shots fired in the adjoining rooms, and I don't know why. Those doors were right there. In fact, 9 children used this door to pass out of here and get out. We don't know why. What we do know, and when I spoke to the state attorney, first thing I asked him for was this first door knob ever dusted for prints? Because I want to know, did the shooter touch it? And he told me, no one ever thought of it. And I said, why not? He says, we didn't think about it. But when I brought it up to him, he says, that's a good point. Now, the school was torn down. We can't do anything about it. We will never know if he touched it. I'm going to tell you, I don't think he did. Because that picture of that door you saw, that window was blocked. They had artwork on it. It was not visible through. And by the way, that teacher was on their break period, their prep period. No students were in that room. So it's possible as he walked by, he didn't hear sounds, he didn't see anything, and that's why he went on to the other 2 rooms. I want to talk about Columbine. And Columbine's a little different. First of all, it was the very first one. And it took law enforcement an hour and 45 minutes to breach the campus after the shooting. The shooters had already taken their lives 45 minutes before. So we learned things different. The main shooting happened in the library. However, the 2 shooters did make an incursion into this part of the science wing. I wanted to focus on that because that's the only thing that was different, that paralleled what we were looking at. And when you stop to think that these other shooters had that book, had that knowledge, they too probably understood that. Notice the shooters started at 11:36 and it wasn't until 11:44, 17 minutes after the first shot, that there was any movement into that school. And it was the barricade. It was the standoff. And all the shooting was over in 17 minutes. Yet it took law enforcement an hour and 40 minutes to get in. We started to battle this war differently after that event. They looked into the rooms. These were rooms that were occupied by the two shooters. Keep in mind, for the record, yes, I know the names of all these shooters. I'll be damned if I give them their notoriety by using their names. I don't use their names in public, and I'll be damned if I use it in private too. I'm not going to give them what they wanted. They seek fame, and they're not getting it from me. Their behavior was directionless. They shot into empty rooms. Now, what's so funny is we'll see some of the parallels from the shooter at Virginia Tech. Let's talk about Virginia Tech for a moment. How many of your schools look like this? It's called double-loaded corridor. Classrooms each side, all the way in. Ironically, this is the picture of Norris Hall where the shooting took place. I think all of us as facilities people need to understand one thing. I got buildings like this. So at the very least, there must be something there to learn. Now, when I first did my research, there were a lot of people who kind of bragged on me and almost condemned my research by including this because I was in the K-12 market. They said, but these are college students, they react different. I need you to understand, I'm not looking at what the victims did. I'm looking at what did the perpetrators do. Do they have commonalities? That's what we need to know. And one day, I might be able to get a research project. I want a forensic psychologist to go into it. And by the way, the last two shootings, we now have shooters alive that could have information. And I hope over the next 5, 10, 15 years, some of that starts to come out. And we start to break down what's in their minds. If we don't understand what's in their minds, we can't understand how to prepare. And as I told all my law enforcement people in these conferences I was in, when they looked at me and said, what the hell are you doing here? Because I know I can help you. And after we start looking at this and I start to pull some of this data together and I start to draw the conclusions here like I will in a few moments, you too will start to understand. That's why we need to be part of it. I'm telling you right now, you need to be bringing your EMS into your emergency plans you make for your campuses, for your buildings, because they're as vital to the success of mitigating death as you are. The shooter is chained escape doors and put a bomb threat on it. How many of your universities have a policy, you see that, you call the police right away? So did they. It didn't happen. Leave that to think for a minute, and we'll get back to it in a second. The shooter was noticed wandering in and around the halls, poking his head into classrooms and everything. Was that suspicious behavior? Why wasn't anyone called? I bet you all have policies for your faculty. Someone seems strange. I mean, ASU has it. See something, say something. I just got a new button from our employee day just 3 weeks ago. So I know it's there, but no one did. It's not just about what we do, it's about what we don't do. The shooting starts at 9:40 and ends 9 minutes later. Let's take steps by steps through here. This is Norris Hall, second floor, which is interesting because he didn't address the first floor or the third floor. I'm not sure why it was just the second floor, but let's look at the actions. Once he decided to commit to his action, what did he do next? First, room 206, 10 killed, 2 injured, 2 left unharmed. Next step, he moved over to 207. Now, if you notice, those entrances are right across the hall from each other, so it was straight across the hall. Don't let this floor plan confuse you. Look at the doors and the relations, because that's the movement we're looking at. He went straight across. 5 killed, 5 survived. Now he moves right down the hall to 211, intermediate French. 12 killed, 6 survived. He goes to 205, back down to 205. What's so interesting is the students in there understood something was going on and they blocked the door. Why did the students have to block the door?
So no lock on it.
That's exactly right. First mistake we made. You would have thought that long before that, we would have figured out we have to have locking doors in our classrooms. How many of your campuses today still don't have them? I got them. And I talk to my lock shop all the time. OUA, my director, my university architect. Now, he was director when he hired me as director. He's now university architect. Our bottom line is, when we touch these, we bring that up to date. Period. I don't care if it's a $10,000 project or a $3 million project or a $70 million project like I got. We will bring it up because you need to bring it up to date. He returned to 207, blocked from reentry. Survival brings the same instinct. Do you think those students communicated with what they did? No, they just instinctively knew what it. And by the way, to block those doors, they were laying on the floor with their feet up against it, and the shooter shot through the door. Had they been standing up against it, they would have been hit. It's amazing what these people thought of at that moment. Then he returns to 211 and re-enters, completing the shooting. 204, killed six injured, 8 escaped. The 8 that escaped because they jumped from a second-story window. I want you to understand that they were not without injury. Most of them broke legs, arms, other things. But, unlike many of their classmates, they were breathing. Total loss 33. Until the most recent shootings we've seen, this was number 1. Everyone need a moment to breathe. We're getting into pretty heavy stuff here. What do we know about Norris Hall? Things, the shooter walked around, acted erratic, long before anything began. Broke policy that no one on the campus reacted to. Doors were unlockable, number 1 problem. If you've got a classroom door that is not lockable on your campus, go change it now. A lock set costs you $150. How much does a life cost? Bring that up to your decision makers. It's an easy thing. Average shooting there, 10 to 12 minutes. Have we seen the pattern? 17 minutes from Columbine. We had 10 to 12 minutes here. Sandy Hook was 9 minutes. Time is of the essence, is it not? We're starting to understand very much the importance of what we're talking about. And it ended with the shooter's suicide. What's so funny is those large shootings that we talked about at the very beginning, that's the way almost all of them ended. We only have 2. And the amazing part about the one in Texas, mom was already convicted for duplicity with the son. Seeing the signs and not reacting, which is an amazing legal maneuver. Dad's on trial now. That's finally getting focused on what we need to understand. It's the people that are the problem, not the guns. According to the state attorney, the key to survival, barricade, plain dead. One of the female students survived because she laid with her cell phone open. Remember, they had the flip one back then. It's not the new stuff we got today. Had it open to 911 with her hair over it and played dead. It gave vital recon to those responding as to where the shooter was. Because I'm going to tell you right now, even at Sandy Hook, you can hear the shooter on the other side. The first responding law enforcement member was at the very back of the school, and you could still hear the shots being fired on the other side of the building. They could tell it was a distance. They were able, this is recon that gives vital information to responders. I wanted to focus on that because in a minute, We're going to figure that out real quick here with some out-of-the-box thoughts I want to bring to you as we conclude this presentation. Responders were taught, go to the gunfire, period. You hear in the movie where they come up and they say, we need backup, we are backup. That's the attitude. Better be. By the way, that was kind of a flawed, different problem that you saw with the Texas shooting, because after almost 20 years of training, that commander decided not to go immediately in. And you might even see the video where he stopped one of his officers, who, by the way, his child was in it. Now, that's probably a good one to keep out of the mix. But the point is why the hell wasn't anyone else going in? He was breaking the training that he'd been taught. And what was so funny is this is the training I went through 8 years before when I was a school facilities board. So I want to introduce my theory. First of all, I'm not a law enforcement person. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a simple architect. Okay? I'm not saying I have all the answers. What I am saying, though, is when you start looking at the data, we start to see something very differently. And ironically, many people in law enforcement aren't seeing it yet. And I hope that they do start to see it. I want to talk about this idea. See, I noticed something with all these shootings and all these conferences I went to. All these perpetrators only went into the building so deep. And I asked all my law enforcement guys why. And every one of them came back with the same answers, even the psychologists. They don't want to be trapped. Excuse me? Didn't we kill most of the bastards? So I don't understand that. It turns out that there's this small thought, deep and buried into all of us, this survival mode. They're going to go out on their terms, no one else's. So they don't go deep into it. If you notice, we take that small section of the science wing at Columbine, we take Sandy Hook, we take Virginia Tech, we take Parkland. Ironically, Parkland, it was a building that was only about 4 classrooms wide. He shot down this way, went up the second floor, across, up the third floor, across, dropped the gun, walked out, hands up. That's how he got away. He was captured 2 hours later, a couple miles away. But we start to understand, they didn't penetrate the building. Is that an interesting thought? It's a very interesting thought. Why? Because if I had to case harden every school in America today, it would be hundreds of billions of dollars. How many of your political decision makers or finance decision makers have a palate for that? Because I'd like to be with you, because mine's not. So we have to think differently. We need to go to this case hardening of the entry points from the breach. Now, I use that word a lot, and I want everyone to understand. The forcible breach that we saw at Sandy Hook has only occurred in less than a handful of these 200 shootings. All right? Less than a handful. Most of them are perpetrated by people who were supposed to be on the campus. We'll address that in just a moment. We need to understand we don't have to case harden the entire campus. Now all of a sudden, I can propose to my financial decision makers a solution that can cost tens of millions of dollars for the entire district versus hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you think they're going to be a little more warm up to that? My experience is, yeah, they are. Response time is the key. The first officer at Sandy Hook got there about 4.5 minutes after the first shot. He didn't even have time to make it to the front of the school before it was all over. How effective was that? It's not. That tells me we have the responsibility on our end as the facilities people to find ways to slow these people down. When we slow them down, we make it harder for them to get in, and we expose fewer people to the threat. Best protection is entrance prohibition. There's a big word. You know what I mean by that? the shooter can't get in, they can't kill. Great, wonderful, easiest thing, let's do the Sally Port. And the problem is, as I just said, most everyone belonged on the campus. A student, a staffer, a teacher. How do we use interest prohibition if you belong there? So our best tool has now been eliminated. So now it's time to start thinking of other things. And I have to tell you, operations have as much of an impact as facilities. How much security was given to those little rural counties that I was in, those districts where they had a sign-in sheet, no one even at the desk. I can give them everything they need on the facility to secure that building in every way possible, but if they have bad policies and operations, it don't mean anything. We have to get operations involved. More importantly, we have to get the users and the community to buy in. They have to know, they have to be in on it together. This is not an either or. No, if everyone's not working 100% together, it's not going to be successful. And we will have those chinks in the armor that can be exploited. Vision limiting sally ports. We had a great little sally port design at Sandy Hook, but the whole thing was glass. Now, if you remember that first weekend of the shooting, the media, oh, his mother used to work there, he knew the school, he went there. That was all proven wrong. But what was proven in that report, as you saw, as soon as the shooter walks up to the entry, he saw everything he needed to see to recon. Do I have any ex-military people in here? What do you do with a little bit of recon? You exploit the hell out of it. And we just told him the whole book how to get in. Don't leave. Now that's the catch-22 because we need to have vision going out, but we don't want the vision going in. And that's where subtype comes in. Make sure that the designers you work with are familiar with it, if not certified. Learn to figure it out. The new building that they built for Sandy Hook is magnificent. They didn't build it on the same spot as the building, they built it farther back. But to get there is a single path and it moves up and down. Not pedestrian friendly, not vehicle friendly, but they have surveillance for hundreds of feet. There's the key. Panic button system. They can prove most useful when they're tied to an active system. In other words, if that person behind that second door in the sally port has that button, not only do they send EMS, but then it locks gates down or locks the doors. Okay? Now I'm going to give you another thought because when we think about sally ports, people say, why don't we do the first door? There's been cases where shootings have been averted, where that person had gotten into the building a little bit, which diffused them, which in one case I remember, allowed an administrator to talk the shooter out from even getting into the building till the police responded. See, the thought by many in the security field is if we make that first door the door barrier, like with Sandy Hook, all we do is elevate the emotions of that perpetrator and they will force their way in. If you get them into an enclosed area, now we can start to diffuse it. And there's psychological issues that come apart with that, which I'm neither school or intelligent enough to speak on, but I do know that we need to think about that. So think about the barrier being the second door of the sally port, not the first, and let that become a buffer zone. Limiting access in an event such as a gate may prove the most effective. As soon as someone comes in and starts to force their way in, push a button. Now, I want everyone to think a minute, because I talked a lot about active shooting. On our campuses, especially in the lower ed, the K-12 where I come from, but it's not much different here. Do you know what the two biggest threats to our children are? Bullying, custodial interference. Now, the second one, we don't have that problem as much on higher ed, but we sure have that other one, don't we? How do we address it? We can only address that through operations, not through facilities. We must plan not just for the active shooter, but natural disasters. For those of you along this eastern seaboard, you have this wonderful thing, hurricanes and everything. What do you do in that case? Okay? We have a weather event we call microbursts. Beautiful, cloudless day, wonderful. Thunderstorm comes up that quick, and next thing you know, we've got 55, 60 mile an hour burst, destroying buildings right below it. So natural disasters have to be part of it. Man-made disasters, those are the ones I talked about a little earlier. You got chemicals on site? Yeah, it's gonna be there, eventually, period. How do we do it? Training is the biggest thing there. Make sure everyone's current, make sure everyone understands the importance of it. Hazardous material spills, custodial interference, bullying, these are the things I just talked about. Loss of utilities. What do you do if one of your buildings, or God forbid your campus, loses power or water? What's your contingency plans? What do you do? How many of your schools have dorm rooms? Can you imagine what hell breaks loose if you lost water for that for a week? You know? What are those plans? What do you do? Yes, I do want to focus on the shooter because that's where I get people's attention, but what I want us to do is realize school security goes far beyond that. What type of prevention tools do we have? That's the next thing to look at. ERP. I'm in Tennessee, guys. I don't know what you call it. We call it ERP. It's an emergency response plan. Every state calls it something different. It doesn't matter what it is. You've got to have one. And I'm going to tell you, it comes right back to what we talked about. Plan it, train it, practice it. How many lives could have been saved had the policies about the chains on the door, the wandering student, had those policies been implemented and the police called, could we have saved a number of lives? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate, but I'm going to tell you right now, if your ERP is a 4-inch binder on a shelf with 2 inches of dust, it ain't working for no one. Okay? We need to understand they have to be thin, 5, 6, 7 pages at most. Because I'm going to tell you right now, when all hell breaks loose, who's grabbing that notebook from the shelf to read it to say, what do we do next? And if you don't train it or practice it, it doesn't mean anything. You've got to figure out event management, a command center, a media center. By the way, preferably, especially with drones today, media center about 5 miles away. Make up a deal with the McDonald's, hey, we get an event, we're going to put media out there. We don't want them anywhere near our students. The most traumatizing event they've lived through, and then we're going to let a microphone be shoved into their face. Yeah, that'll work, won't it? We need to think about evacuation, reunification. What do you do in shelter in place? These are all part of that ERP you need to know. Don't try to make everyone play a game plan. You know, I coached and played ball most of my life. I played competitive baseball, softball until I was 41. I had my first non-pro team that I owned and ran when I was 20. And you know what I learned from the dugout? And I told my players this all the time. There's not one thing I can do to help you win this game. There are 10 million things I can do to cost you this game. My job is to stay out of the road. We have to do the same thing with this. We have to train our people, just like I did with my ball players. Going into the game, you give them a game plan and you tell them how to execute. And after that, it's up to them. We need to understand that ERPs are practice, plan, and train. Everyone knows about it. It's easy to do. We need to understand that after the event, there's money, lots of money, 4 to 1 according to the FBI, okay? $1 of prevention saves $4 in mitigation. That's what we need to do. So let's talk about out of the box real quickly. Roxbury, Massachusetts, if you get a chance to look at it, this is one of the most, this was the career killers. Teachers were put there at the end of their career after they pissed off administration. They had They had the metal detectors. It was a very rough neighborhood. About 3 years before Sandy Hook, they got a new principal, and he looked at this. $100,000 a year out of his budget for security, he got rid of it all. Metal detectors, security guards, he kept minimal guards. He put that money into the arts. In less than 2 years, that became top performing in the region. Is that out of the box thinking? 3 years before Sandy Hook, he had something in his mind. Dogs on campus. Now there's two types of this. One is you get these, you've all seen canine units, and these dogs are well trained. They have a disposition you don't want to be near. In fact, the only person in the whole world they like is the handler. You know? But there's two groups in the U.S. that will take those puppies at a very young age, very, very young age, and they get the ones that have a social disposition, and they train them the same way with the intent of putting them on campuses, okay? And outside Cleveland, a school district did it. Atticus, the principal spent $10,000. The Atticus goes home with him on the weekends and vacations. He's on a leash with 2 security guards during the day, and the district has said the school has been safe. It made safer, okay? There's another one when we start talking about the primary school, companion dogs going out. See, we need to all recognize everything we talk about here is about a cycle that keeps going on and on and on. How do we break the cycle? These companion dogs, they will pick out these children because they can sense that they're in trouble. And a finely tuned adult administrator can start to look, and we start to break that cycle. Panic button, GEOS, out of Houston, Texas. We have a smartphone. You can get that for your districts, for your schools. It's a single button push, leads you directly to their call center. They don't respond unless you speak first. Their job is to sit there just like that young lady at Virginia Tech that gave first responders important recon information. Just before, years before, a school district in Florida, Broward County, they got rid of most of their SROs who were police and put them in counselors. Identify the problem before it becomes a problem. Kind of a little different approach than what we've been hearing. We need to be creative, absolutely creative. I'm an architect, I push that more and more and more for everyone. I wrote a 4-part article series that gets into this very much in depth. Please take this QR code. It will lead you to it. It will give you much more information than I was able to cover here. All right? But I think you will find that catalyst for you to start thinking out of the box, because that's what it's going to require. That concludes the AIA portion. Any questions, any comments? I know it's pretty heavy, and I think by the time you get home at night tonight, you'll start to process, and you'll have the questions. I have my card up here. I even have a card with my book on it. I do have a chapter on security where we get into this. So with that, I want to thank you all. I want to thank APPA for giving me my first chance to speak here, and wish you all a fine. Yes?
So I've been working to implement some new security card measures at my university, and I'm getting a lot of pushback from my superiors about lockdown procedures. I want to push to lock down the university when an event like this happens, but I get a lot of pushback, like, what if we have students in the hallways and they can't get into the classroom, or they can't get it out of harm's way? Do you have any advice?
I actually do. In fact, when you read this article series, I'm going to tell you about it's a group out of Colorado, and I actually know the founder of it, John Michael Keyes. His daughter was the only victim other than that shooter that died at the Play Canyon high school shooting in Colorado, just outside Boulder, I think it was, in '06. He's got a foundation that's called I Love You Guys. They have an SRP, Standard Response Protocols, and they have an SRM, which is a Standard Reunification Plans. Now, granted, it's written for K-12 market, but there's a lot of stuff about how to deal with lockdowns and everything in there that you could probably find really good. It doesn't cost a penny. Go to it, download it, see what's applicable. If you have further questions, a great resource is Paul Tim. You can find him on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email and I can hook you up with him as well. Paul Tim is one of the top school security specialists, and he is in Phoenix frequently. I don't know if he comes over here as much. I know he's based more towards the East Coast, so but you can look him up on LinkedIn as well. Those are resources. I'd like to give you more information on that, but that's really more operations, and I hate to say it, I'm a designer. I know enough to I'll dig a hole big enough for us to both go into, but I'd rather you not sink with me. So, but those would be the resources I would recommend. Okay? Any other questions? Thank you everyone for coming. Have a good rest of the convention.